A poor man, buried in debt, with his fate seemingly sealed. Until a horse auction changes everything. Seizing the opportunity when the millionaire backs out. Will this bet on trust and burning determination with a wild Mustang lead him to defy the odds and change his destiny? Or will he lose his last chance, falling into an irretrievable abyss? The unexpected bond between him and the rejected wild horse raises doubts for the entire world. This is no ordinary auction. It's a battle of stubbornness and resolve, where only one can emerge victorious. Will he be the one to win, or will he fail in this fierce contest? Don't miss it, this story will leave you on the edge of your seat. The weak morning light cast a dim glow over the horse auction grounds in the small town of Ruston. The air was thick with dust, dry and brittle, while fluorescent lights flickered weakly overhead, offering little comfort to the room. The smell of damp earth and horsehide mingled, filling the space with a heavy, almost oppressive feeling. It was as if time itself was trapped here, caught in the struggle of poverty and decay. The soft murmur of the auction crowd mingled with the sound of hooves pounding against the hard dirt, echoing like a deep call in the stillness. The horses emerged from the shadows, strong and full of intent, each step a declaration of the fierce lives they represented. But the weak light only emphasized their darkness, as if they didn't truly belong here. As the horses were paraded out for the auction, the bidders only focused on their material value, just livestock, nothing more. But there, standing at the back of the room, watching from the shadows, was Lucas James. Lucas was unlike the other men in the crowd. He wasn't wearing polished boots or tailored coats like the wealthy ranchers who walked around with an air of superiority. His clothes were old, faded from years of hard labor. His boots were thick and worn from the weight of the soil he had plowed for years, the soles eroded by endless battles with the land that had given him so little. His face, rugged and scarred from years of exposure to the harsh sun, reflected the exhaustion of a man who had fought for every step. His broad, muscular shoulders, built from working the land, seemed to carry more than just the weight of his work, they bore the weight of a life hanging on the edge of desperation. Yet, despite the clear hardships, there was something in Lucas's eyes that set him apart. His gaze was sharp, perceptive, taking in every detail of the world around him. Unlike the other men, who judged the horses based on their profit potential, Lucas saw something different. To him, each horse was not just livestock, it was a creature of spirit, a potential partner in the struggle for survival. And as he stood there, his eyes fixed on Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt was a wild Mustang, standing tall and proud in the middle of the pen as the auctioneer's voice echoed through the noise. The horse's coat glistened in the dim light, its mane wild and untamed, much like its spirit. It was a creature of the earth, unbroken, with eyes that burned with a fire that no one could control. The horse stood as a symbol of everything Lucas had fought for, the freedom to choose his path, the strength to rise above his circumstances, and the will to keep moving forward even when the odds seemed impossible. But to the men in the barn, Thunderbolt was just a nuisance. It was too wild, too unpredictable. It kicked and reared, its hooves pounding against the ground with a defiance that seemed to challenge anyone who dared to approach. The other bidders looked on with disdain, muttering among themselves about how no one could tame such a beast. It was more trouble than it was worth. Standing near the front of the crowd was Victor Crowley, a man whose wealth and power had been built on the backs of horses. He wore an expensive suit, his boots polished to perfection, and a sneer on his face as he gazed at Thunderbolt. He was a man who had everything, money, land, influence, and yet he looked down upon those who struggled to make ends meet. Victor's gaze swept over Thunderbolt with a dismissive look. "A wild thing like that is worthless," he muttered, turning to the auctioneer. "You'll never make anything of it. A horse like that is more trouble than it's worth." The crowd murmured in agreement. The wild horse, impossible to train, impossible to tame. And for someone like Victor, who was used to seeing only profit in the horses he bought, Thunderbolt was nothing but a burden. With a mocking smile, Victor raised his hand, offering a low bid, hoping to drive the price down. He didn't want the horse, he saw it as a way to weaken his competition and ensure that the horses he really wanted would be within his grasp. As the bidding began, the atmosphere in the barn grew tense. Well-dressed men, each with money to burn, started raising their hands to claim the horses they wanted, strong, well-trained animals that could fetch a high price. Thunderbolt stood in stark contrast, its wild eyes blazing with an untamed fury that made the other bidders uneasy. Victor's voice rang out, $200 for this beast. Who'll take it? The crowd chuckled, exchanging glances, the whispers of disbelief hanging in the air. No one seemed interested, and the auctioneer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Lucas, standing at the back of the barn, could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had no money, no way to compete with the wealth of the men around him. But something about Thunderbolt called to him. The wildness, the challenge, the strength, it spoke to him, and deep down, he knew this was his chance. The auctioneer's voice continued to echo in the barn, but all Lucas could hear was the beat of his own heart. He knew the risk, he knew the odds were against him. He had no savings, no backup plan. But Thunderbolt was the one opportunity he had to change everything. Without thinking, Lucas stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. $500. The room went silent. The other bidders turned to stare at the man who had dared challenge them, a poor, ragged farmer who had no business bidding on such a horse. Victor glanced over his shoulder, a mix of amusement and contempt on his face. $500? He sneered. You're wasting your time. That horse is useless. But Lucas didn't back down. He could see the fear and uncertainty in Thunderbolt's eyes, but he also saw something else, a spark of potential, a possibility that no one else saw. He could feel the connection between them, even from a distance. This was his shot, his chance to prove to the world, and to himself, that he could do more than survive. He could change his fate. 500. Lucas repeated, his voice steady but firm. The auctioneer hesitated for a moment, then brought the hammer down. Sold. As the crowd buzzed with disbelief, Lucas stood there, heart pounding, as Thunderbolt was led toward him. The horse snorted and pawed at the ground, wild and untamed, but Lucas didn't flinch. He stepped forward, offering his hand to the Mustang, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had made a decision that could change everything. This wasn't just about a horse. This was about his future. This was his chance to prove that he was more than just a poor farmer. And as he looked into Thunderbolt's fierce, wild eyes, he knew that together, they would fight to prove that anything was possible. With Thunderbolt by his side, Lucas knew he had just been given his one chance to change his life. But he also realized that the road ahead wasn't just about taming a wild horse, it was a battle to conquer himself. Each day of training would test him not only physically, but also challenge his faith and patience, as he and Thunderbolt began to build an unbreakable bond. The first days of training Thunderbolt were a brutal test of will, demanding more than just Lucas's physical strength. Every morning, as he approached the paddock, he could never be sure what kind of resistance the wild Mustang would offer. Some days, Thunderbolt would bolt away in panic, kicking up dust as it tried to escape, the raw power of its hooves a constant reminder of its untamed nature. Other times, the Mustang would rear up, striking out with its hooves, narrowly missing Lucas as he tried to approach. Each rejection felt like a personal failure to Lucas. Every time Thunderbolt lashed out or ran away, it echoed his own lifetime of rejection. Lucas had always been the underdog, the outsider, constantly overlooked, constantly fighting to prove his worth. And now, even a wild horse seemed to be denying him the connection he so desperately needed. The physical pain of being thrown to the ground or narrowly avoided by Thunderbolt's powerful hooves was sharp, a bruise here, a scrape there. But it was the emotional sting that lingered. Am I really capable of this? Lucas often asked himself as he lay on the ground, staring up at the sky. The bruises on his arms grew darker with each failure. But no matter how many times he fell, no matter how much pain he endured, he refused to stay down. His determination, forged through years of hardship, drove him to keep trying. Thunderbolt wasn't just a horse to Lucas, it was a reflection of himself. A creature abandoned, neglected, and misunderstood. Just like him, it had been pushed aside by the world, forced to fight for every ounce of respect. And as Thunderbolt kicked, bucked, and resisted every attempted connection, Lucas saw a mirror image of his own struggles, a life spent fighting to survive, fighting to belong, but never quite fitting in. The training process wasn't just about breaking the wild horse's spirit, it was about earning Thunderbolt's trust, one step at a time. Lucas knew that taming a horse as wild as Thunderbolt wouldn't happen overnight. Every time the Mustang resisted, every time it rejected him, Lucas had to fight against the gnawing doubts in his heart. Was he really capable of this? Could he really make a difference in the horse's life, and in his own? The first breakthrough came unexpectedly one morning. After several days of Thunderbolt rejecting him, Lucas decided to approach the horse slowly, methodically, giving it space. Instead of rushing forward to dominate, he took a step back, offering the horse the opportunity to come to him on its own terms. With a rope loosely hanging from his hand, Lucas sat down on a bale of hay, waiting. He knew the horse was watching him, its fiery eyes observing every move. As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Lucas remained perfectly still, his breathing slow and steady. Thunderbolt shifted nervously at first, but Lucas remained patient, his gaze calm. Slowly, Thunderbolt took a step forward. And then another. The connection wasn't immediate. It wasn't dramatic. But as Lucas extended his hand, Thunderbolt hesitated before reaching out and touching Lucas's fingers. It was a moment of trust, small but profound. Lucas felt his heart race. It wasn't just the physical touch that mattered, it was the understanding, the silent acknowledgement that the horse had begun to trust him. The wall of resistance was crumbling, but it wasn't just Thunderbolt that was changing. Lucas himself was beginning to change, too. In that moment, he realized that this was not just about taming the horse, it was about finding a way to trust again. Trust in the process. Trust in himself. Trust in the possibility that, even though things had been hard for so long, something beautiful could still be built from the wreckage of their pasts. One evening, after another exhausting day, Lucas sat by the fence, watching Thunderbolt pace restlessly in the pen. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the paddock, but Lucas didn't move. His body ached from the constant struggle, but his mind was clear. The moment had come to test what he had learned so far. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small lantern. The flickering light seemed to soften the edges of the world around him, creating a peaceful aura despite the wild energy of Thunderbolt. With a soft hum of the evening breeze, Lucas began to sing, a simple lullaby his mother had sung to him when he was a child. The song was quiet, comforting, a link to something long lost. The melody floated through the air, soft and warm. As Lucas sang, Thunderbolt paused. The horse's wild eyes softened, and for the first time, Lucas could see something different, something like curiosity. Thunderbolt's movements slowed, the tense body relaxing as it listened. It was a small moment, barely perceptible, but to Lucas, it was everything. The walls between them were finally beginning to crumble, not through force, but through patience, understanding, and trust. Thunderbolt didn't approach him immediately, but that didn't matter. For the first time, Lucas felt like they had shared something deeper than just a training session. It was a moment of quiet, of connection, a bond forged in the calm of a simple song. As the days passed, there was a subtle but undeniable shift in Thunderbolt. It wasn't a dramatic change. It wasn't a sudden transformation. But each time the horse took a step closer, each time it allowed Lucas to touch it with less fear, Lucas felt a surge of hope. The Mustang still resisted at times, still hesitated, but there was no longer the same wild, unrelenting hostility. Thunderbolt had begun to trust him, and that trust was growing with each passing day. For Lucas, this shift was monumental. It was more than just gaining the trust of a horse, it was about gaining trust in himself. With each small victory, he began to believe that maybe he wasn't just the failure he had always thought he was. He wasn't just a man who had been beaten down by life. He was someone capable of change, of growth, of healing. The bond between them wasn't about submission. It wasn't about control. It was about mutual respect, patience, and understanding. Lucas began to see that Thunderbolt's resistance wasn't simply about rebellion, it was about fear, about the pain of being forced to give up one's freedom. Thunderbolt had always fought to keep its identity, just as Lucas had fought to keep his. And now, they were both learning to trust again. One day, Matthew Dawson, Lucas's old friend, came to visit. They had once been inseparable, but now there was a great divide between them, an unspoken distance that couldn't be erased. Matthew saw the changes in Lucas, but not just in his appearance. He noticed something had shifted in his spirit. He realized Lucas was doing something different, something that seemed reckless, even crazy. "Lucas, you've lost your mind," Matthew said, his voice full of concern but tinged with disdain. Do you really think that wild horse is going to change your life? It's just a wild animal, and you're only hurting yourself. Matthew's words hit Lucas like a knife to the heart. It wasn't the mockery in his tone that stung, but the truth in what he said. Lucas couldn't deny that a part of him still had doubts, still questioned the path he was on. But when he looked at Thunderbolt, he realized something: everything had changed. He couldn't go back. He couldn't give up, because if he did, all the struggles, all the fights would have been for nothing. Every day, Lucas faced doubt, not just from those around him, but from within himself. As Thunderbolt grew more familiar with him, each step forward was still a struggle. Every time he thought he had made progress, something would cause him to pause. The horse was still wild, still scared, still refusing to fully connect. Lucas learned to listen, to be patient, but deep inside, the waves of failure still loomed. Each time Thunderbolt rejected him, it was another reminder of the fear and self-doubt Lucas had lived with his whole life. Can I really do this? He would ask himself each night, alone with his thoughts. That question echoed in his mind, never quite silenced. But when he looked at Thunderbolt, the horse's steadfast gaze seemed to say, "We will get through this together." And in that moment, Lucas realized that he was not the only one fighting. Thunderbolt was too. Although Lucas and Thunderbolt had overcome many challenges, a new, greater threat from the outside emerged, one that would test not only their physical strength but their spirits as well. Everything would come to a head in a public competition, where their patience and trust would be tested once again. As Lucas and Thunderbolt grew closer, news of their progress spread like wildfire. Soon, Victor Crowley, the wealthy rancher who had once dismissed Lucas as nothing more than an underdog, saw the perfect opportunity to reassert his superiority. With a smug grin, he approached Lucas, his words carrying the sting of a challenge. "I've heard you've made some progress with that wild Mustang of yours," Victor sneered. "Let's see if it's all talk. I challenge you to a competition, Lucas. A test of skill, of control. Let's see if your training has really made a difference." Lucas felt a cold shiver run through him. It wasn't just about proving himself to Victor, it was about proving himself to the world, and perhaps more importantly, to the man he had always been, the one who had been rejected, ignored, and underestimated. The thought of failing again, of losing everything he had worked for, gnawed at him. But in the depths of his soul, he knew he couldn't back down. Not this time. With Thunderbolt by his side, Lucas reluctantly agreed to the challenge. The next few days would be grueling, both for him and the Mustang. The competition was more than just a public test, it was an opportunity for Lucas to prove that he was more than the world had ever believed him to be. Training for the competition was intense. Every day, Lucas pushed himself harder, working with Thunderbolt until both man and horse were exhausted. But the fear of failure loomed over him, heavier than ever. As the days passed, Lucas felt the weight of the challenge begin to wear him down. His body ached, his mind was weary, and yet, the doubts never stopped. "Can I really do this?" Lucas would ask himself, staring at Thunderbolt with a mixture of hope and fear. Each time the Mustang hesitated or rebelled, Lucas felt his own self-doubt grow stronger. Every time the horse seemed to pull away, it felt like a rejection, not just from Thunderbolt, but from the world itself. But as exhausted as Lucas was, there was one thing that kept him going: the bond he shared with Thunderbolt. In the moments when he felt like giving up, he would look into the horse's eyes, and for the first time, he understood something deeper. Thunderbolt wasn't just a reflection of his own struggles, he was a reminder that there was strength in persistence, that growth came through trust, not force. The night before the competition, a fierce storm rolled in, its howling winds shaking the barn where Thunderbolt was kept. The Mustang, already on edge from the pressure of the upcoming contest, became more restless by the minute. Lucas tried to calm him, speaking gently, but the horse's fear only grew. Then, with one swift movement, Thunderbolt broke free from his stall and bolted into the night. Lucas's heart raced as he chased after him, the storm fierce around him. The rain lashed at his face, and the wind screamed in his ears, but it was the fear inside his chest that drove him forward. The Mustang was out there, wild and free, and Lucas feared he had lost everything. He ran through the night, his thoughts filled with doubt and anxiety. What if this was the end? What if Thunderbolt never comes back? In that moment, Lucas felt like a failure again. caught in the same storm of fear and self-doubt that had always held him back. After hours of searching, Lucas finally found Thunderbolt standing by the edge of a muddy field. The Mustang was trembling, exhausted, his wild eyes still full of panic. Lucas's heart ached as he approached slowly, speaking softly, trying to soothe the horse that had once rejected him so forcefully. For the first time, Lucas didn't try to control the situation. He didn't push Thunderbolt to listen. Instead, he simply stood there, offering his presence, waiting for the horse to come to him in its own time. The storm continued to rage around them, but Lucas found a quiet center within himself. As he reached out, Thunderbolt hesitated, his body tense, but slowly, step by step, the horse took a step closer. And then another. The Mustang's fiery eyes softened just a little, and Lucas extended his hand, letting the horse come to him, not out of force, but out of trust. The storm continued to rage, but in that moment, Lucas knew something had shifted. He had found peace, not by forcing Thunderbolt into submission, but by offering him the one thing he had been missing all along, patience and trust. The storm outside was still raging, but it no longer mattered. The battle they had fought, both inside and outside, had brought them closer together than ever before. The next day, Lucas stood at the edge of the arena, looking out at the crowd that had gathered to watch the competition. His nerves were raw, his body tired, and yet, the bond he had with Thunderbolt was stronger than ever. The horse stood beside him, calm and focused, ready for whatever came next. Victor, standing across from them with his polished boots and sharp suit, was the picture of confidence. He had no idea what it had taken for Lucas to get here. He didn't understand the years of rejection, the pain, the doubt. For Victor, this was just another contest, another way to prove his superiority. But for Lucas, this was more than that. It was a battle for his dignity, for his right to be seen. The competition began, and Lucas and Thunderbolt moved as one, their movements fluid, their bond evident in every step. The audience watched in awe as they navigated the course with a grace that no one had expected. The wild Mustang was no longer a symbol of rebellion, it was a symbol of perseverance, of the strength that came from trust. In the end, it wasn't about winning the competition. It was about proving to himself, to Thunderbolt, and to the world that they were capable of more than anyone had ever believed. With every step, every moment of connection, Lucas had already won the greatest prize of all, the strength to keep going, no matter the obstacles. After facing the storm, both inside and out, Lucas and Thunderbolt stood at the precipice of something greater. The competition was their moment to prove not only their skill but the strength of the bond they had forged. It was time to show the world what they were capable of, together. The competition day arrived with a crisp, charged atmosphere, the excitement of the crowd palpable in the air. Spectators filled the stands, their eyes eagerly watching, while the horses were lined up at the starting gate. Victor stood confidently beside his prize stallion, a figure of wealth and control. His horse was polished, a perfect example of what wealth and breeding could produce. But Lucas and Thunderbolt were different, wild, untamed, and forged through hardship. As the race began, Lucas felt the full weight of what they had fought for. His body, sore from days of training, moved with Thunderbolt's rhythm. The obstacles were set before them, jumps, tight corners, and hurdles designed to test not only the horse's agility but the rider's ability to control and guide. Thunderbolt soared over the first hurdle with surprising grace. The Mustang's hoofs landed with a force that echoed in the silence, their energy a perfect harmony of strength and trust. The crowd gasped, watching as the wild horse moved with a confidence Lucas had never seen before. Victor's horse was fast and precise, but Lucas didn't focus on it. Instead, he trusted Thunderbolt completely, pushing through the course with determination. When they reached the sharp turn, Thunderbolt's hesitation was minimal. The bond they had forged over months of training, of patience and understanding, was now the driving force that propelled them forward. As they neared the final obstacle, a steep incline that had given them trouble in practice, Lucas felt his heart race. He was exhausted, but he knew that this was the moment. The final hurdle wasn't just physical, it was emotional. For Lucas, this was his chance to prove everything to himself, to Thunderbolt, and to the world. With a surge of energy, Thunderbolt cleared the final obstacle. Lucas held on tightly as they raced to the finish line, their synchronized movements creating a fluid, unstoppable force. The crowd erupted in cheers as they crossed the line, breathless, in a victory that was more than just about the race. It was the culmination of everything they had endured together. As the announcer called the results, Lucas stood silently, his heart thundering in his chest. The judges deliberated, but there was a quiet certainty in the air. When the announcement came, it wasn't just a victory on the scoreboard, it was the confirmation that they had achieved something far more meaningful than winning a trophy. Thunderbolt and Lucas had done it. Against all odds, they had won the competition. But for Lucas, the true victory wasn't the applause of the crowd or the prize in his hand. It was the realization that he had found the courage to rise above his fears, to trust in himself, and in Thunderbolt. He had proven that nothing, neither wealth nor prestige, could measure the strength of a bond forged in the fires of adversity. After the competition, Lucas walked slowly back to the stables, Thunderbolt by his side. The excitement of the crowd still echoed in his ears, but the only sound that mattered now was the rhythmic sound of Thunderbolt's hooves against the dirt. Lucas stopped in front of the barn, his hand resting on Thunderbolt's neck. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fall away. The crowd, the competition, the momentary glory, none of it mattered. What mattered was the connection they had built, the trust they had earned together. "You did it, boy," Lucas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He reached up and gently patted Thunderbolt's neck, a silent promise to the horse who had been more than a partner in this journey. "We did it." Thunderbolt nuzzled him, as if acknowledging that this victory was theirs, together. In that simple moment, Lucas realized that Thunderbolt wasn't just a horse to him, he was family, a companion who had walked beside him through every hardship. The bond between them had reached its pinnacle, not because of the competition, but because of the journey they had shared. After the cheers had faded and the applause had died down, Lucas stood still, his chest rising and falling with the rhythmic breaths of Thunderbolt beside him. They had won the race, but the real victory had already been claimed in the quiet moments they shared. Now, as they looked toward the horizon, Lucas realized that the journey had never been about proving something to others, it had been about proving something to themselves. The man who walked out of the arena that day was not the same man who had walked in. Lucas stood next to Thunderbolt, his hands resting on the horse's broad neck, and for the first time, he truly understood the journey they had both endured. He had spent so many years doubting himself, battling the world, battling his own insecurities. But now, standing beside the Mustang, Lucas had found something he had been searching for all his life: belief, not just in Thunderbolt, but in himself. As he looked into Thunderbolt's calm, trusting eyes, Lucas understood that the horse's wildness mirrored his own struggle. Thunderbolt had been dismissed by the world, just as Lucas had. They had both been labeled as unfit, unworthy, but together, they had found their way. The trust that had been built between them, not just in training, but in the depths of their shared struggles, was their true victory. Lucas didn't just see a horse anymore, he saw a reflection of his own heart, wild, untamed, but now slowly learning to trust, to heal, to grow. The evening sun cast a golden light over the fields, and Lucas stood beside Thunderbolt, watching the world stretch out before them. The quiet of the moment settled into Lucas's heart, and the weight of the past seemed to lift, as though it had never been there. Thunderbolt's coat glistened in the fading light, the horse standing strong, steady beside him. They had overcome so much together: doubt, fear, and rejection. But now, they were no longer defined by those struggles. Lucas smiled as he reached out, gently patting Thunderbolt's mane, feeling the soft warmth of the animal beneath his hand. He didn't need to speak, the silence between them said everything. Thunderbolt, once a creature of pure rebellion, now stood as a symbol of everything Lucas had learned. They had both fought their battles, but they had found a peace in each other. As the wind gently swept across the fields, Lucas's mind wandered back to the beginning of his journey with Thunderbolt. He had come into the race as an outsider, a man whose life had been shaped by hardship. But now, he had something that couldn't be measured by trophies or applause. He had found his own worth, his own strength, and with that, a bond that went deeper than any external victory. Lucas stood there, looking out at the vast horizon, and for the first time, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel like an outsider. The world may have doubted him, but in that moment, he knew something the world could never take away. The true victory wasn't in the race, the applause, or the prize. It was in the journey itself, the patience, the trust, and the bond forged between him and Thunderbolt. This was not a victory earned through force or control, but one built through understanding, patience, and love. Lucas had learned that real change doesn't come from winning or defeating others, it comes from the ability to rise above your own doubts, to trust in the process, and to believe that even the wildest hearts can find peace, even if it takes time. The greatest victory is not in being seen by the world, but in seeing and understanding yourself.